Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying this well-organized conference so far. Welcome to this session on scholarly publishing. My name is Ali Shiri, and I'm a professor at the School of Library Information Studies in the University of Alberta, and I'll be your session moderator this morning. So we have 3 papers in this session, all of which present very interesting insights into scholarly communication. So each presenter will have 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes of question and answers. And we will be using the chat and raise hand features for that part of the session. So to begin with, the first paper entitled Mapping the Canadian Library Information Science Research Landscape by Marc-André Simard, Vinson Lee, Emily McClean, and Philippe Mongeon. Take it away, Philippe.
Thank you for the introduction, Ali. And thank you everyone for being here this morning to hear this presentation. It is just a little bit of context. This is a project that involves Cora-Lynn, Munroe-Lynds, Vinson Lee, and Emily McClean, who are students at the master student at the Simard school at Dalhousie University, which I joined last year. Marc-André is also a PhD student at the University of Montreal. And so this project comes from multiple sort of angles. One of them is my role as a Canadian Association of Information Science president over the last 2 years now, and we're trying to and our desire to map the Canadian Library and Information Science research landscape comes from a desire to understand the community that we're supposed to serve as an association. For the students, it's a way to get involved and get to know their fields. And it's a contribution that I think we can also bring to the community as a tool to navigate the map. So it's just a little bit of context, but I will get back to that at the end of the presentation. So there we go. All right. So we know, right? I mean, I think everybody in this room, or most of us anyway, are information scientists or somewhere in that realm. We've known for a long time that our field is multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, and that it has a lot of relationship with all range of like fields of science, from the arts and humanities to the hard sciences, and everything in between, social sciences, for instance. And this is the paper or the diagram that Marcia Bates put in her paper from 2015, where she tried to map out all the sub-areas of information science in a way that we could understand this diversity and this range of different things that we do and that we care about. So we know that. And this, of course, has been done from, it's a based on her understanding of the field of the literature, or of being active in that field for a long time. And she was able to come up with this structure, and it makes sense, right? There are also previous bibliometric works that has attempted to produce maps of our field in order to highlight this interdisciplinarity, or its diversity, or how it's been evolving over time, etc. So our work in this regard is not necessarily new or original. We are doing yet another map of information science. There are some specificity to our map, which I will get to in a moment. But so we know also from bibliometric studies that our field is interdisciplinary. There's nothing new there. There's also some studies in the bibliometric realm that have looked at how the field evolves over time. So by looking at hot topics and the changing topics that we address over time, and that has been done also, as you can see, with the list of references many times. And I'm sure this is not even a comprehensive list. And that's something interesting, and then that's where I get into the main limitations of past studies. Is that recently I was reading yet another bibliometric study of the field, and then there seems to be always the story that health, actually, that specific paper, and I'm not sure which one it is, talked about health becoming like one of the core topic of the field and bibliometrics. And that struck me because, knowing the field, I know that in Canada, for instance, bibliometricians are minority. Like when we think of the field as the community of LIS schools or the people we know, there's not a lot of bibliometricians. So it's kind of surprising that it would be described by in a bibliometric paper as one of the core topics in the field, right? And then that made me think about, of course, this is a reflection. I mean, my hypothesis is that this is a reflection of the biases that are caused by by this multidisciplinary of the field, right? So we acknowledge that we're multidisciplinary, yet when we produce bibliometric accounts of our field, we fail to acknowledge or to take into account this multidisciplinarity that leads it to some parts of the field being extremely prolific and some other parts of the fields like humanities, for instance, publishing in papers that are not even part of our data, and also at a much lower rate, which is just normal because it's the pace of knowledge production in their field. So when we fail to acknowledge that, we can say things like bibliometrics is the core of the LIS field, which is obviously not the case, at least not in my opinion. So that's one of the limitations that we tried to address in this paper. And the other one is that is just a challenge when trying to do bibliometrics maps, is that we often will use some classification or often journal classification that will introduce papers that relate to our field, but that might be coming from other fields, or you know, journal classifications are not perfect, and there's lots of false positive or negatives that occur when we're using these classifications. And you know, the opposite of that is as an LIS person who's doing bibliometrics, I might publish in journals that are not in our field, and I'm sure it happens to a lot of us, or multidisciplinary journals, for instance, where they are categorized as multidisciplinary or sometimes some other field, but yet we publish there, and then this is invisible to bibliometric attempts to capture our field. So that's the second limitation that I'm trying to address, that we're trying to address. Okay, so our actual objective is to map, right, the research output of Canadian LIS schools. And then the schools here is very important because usually what we do is we find papers or we find journals and we map that. And what I'm trying to do, and this goes back to me being president of CAIS and trying to serve a specific community, I'm trying to map what we do in our Canadian LIS departments. So that's one specificity of this research. And then to understand what topics the schools cover, right? So what's the distribution of topics across schools, and discuss the challenges. I've already been doing that along my presentation, but the challenges of building these meaningful maps of a field that is multidisciplinary and complex like LIS. So what we did, we went on the website of the Canadian LIS schools, and I should say schools and faculties because we're not all schools, but my apologies to the faculties. And then we got the list of students and professors, students, PhD students only, unfortunately, and then went to find them their publications in the Web of Science, and then having found their publications, we took the address and the metadata of the papers in order to get papers from the same schools, but that were not from people that are no longer in the schools, in order to be able to go back in history and see what the schools produced back in the days when other people were there, and see, so that we would be able eventually to understand the evolution of the collective, but of each of the individual schools. So that's one of the objectives of this thing. And usually we put the limitations at the end. I'm putting it right here because we know that Web of Science doesn't cover the field super well. In fact, in the last time that we made a map of Canadian LIS, we used Google Scholar and compared to Web of Science and found that half of the papers weren't there. So this is preliminary. We are at the moment collecting data from other sources, including Google Scholar, and we aim to do a comprehensive, to work on with a comprehensive data set. But the maps you're about to see and the results, they are based on Web of Science. So it might not represent every school's contribution or the entire field in its entire. I just think it's important to mention so that you know, right? But the numbers cannot be right. They're not complete reflection of our output. So this is just the number of people that we have in our set and the number of publications. I'm not going to dwell here much longer. For the mapping, standard methods. Actually, we use the hybrid approach that Boyack and Clarence propose that combines both citation links and similarities between the content of the papers, actually the titles and the abstract in this case, so that and then we're able to connect papers that are semantically or that speak about the same things but are not necessarily citing each other, which helps getting more relationship visible in the network. And then we apply, as usual, the Louvain algorithm to identify different sub areas in this entire set. So what we get is something like this that has different areas. The labels that you see here, they are based on our own observations of the paper within each of the clusters. And so we put a label, which in some cases may be very good, in some cases may be questionable, but it's still sort of represents what we're seeing here. And then, so that's the map. Okay, that's good. We know that there's a lot of altmetrics and bibliometrics, and that this thing is together in the middle, information behavior, information retrieval, which other papers I found are and we know are kind of the core of our field. So that's not very surprising, but this is what our production looks like, seen through the Web of Science, I repeat. And then the next question is, okay, is this a portrait of what we each bring? So are we in a way a great Canadian mosaic of LIS, which each our own individuality, or do we all sort of spread and do all of these things, right? So that's the next question when I talk about distribution of topics across within the schools, is to see if maybe nobody does the same thing, but together we construct that thing, or it's the opposite and we all do everything. So that's kind of what I wanted to show, or what we wanted to show with the next slide, and actually the next few slides. And just a simple way of doing that is you can just take out one specific institution and see what's left of the network when you remove everybody else. And here we can see McGill, UDM, UFT, and Western. And you can identify very clear focus in the case of UDM and Western, where Western is basically responsible for the entire health information part of the map. And that's not surprising. We know that at Western, they have an health information specialty and a lot of people working in it. We know that at UDM, actually, I know that at UDM, there's Vinson in his lab, where I come from, Adele Paulus comes from, where Marc-André is located now. And we publish, and he has a chair, so we publish a lot of papers. So it's not surprising to see this UDM being very focused on bibliometrics. But we also know that there's a lot missing. So we know Alberta as a bibliometrician now, LFZ as one, and bibliometrics has been done at McGill also a little bit, you can see. Anyway, the point is that we can see what each schools bring to the global picture. And the case of McGill and UFT, and I'm sorry if your school is not represented, we see a more diversified picture. So that's also interesting. There's diversity there as well. So that's great, but then it doesn't solve the problem that I mentioned earlier, where we don't take into account disciplinary publishing practices or distinct cultures. What happens is that Vincent Larivière in his lab, we are a minority of the Montreal school, right? There's, I don't know how big is the school, but there's probably around 20 faculty members, 20 PhD students. So there's 39 people that are not doing bibliometrics. And then, yet when we look at the map, we see a lot of bibliometrics because Vincent publishes a lot of papers. And so when we fail to acknowledge that there's a natural difference in our publishing output, when we look at these maps, then we have a biased understanding of what we are as a school, right? So in a sense, this highlights that bibliometrics are good if you want to map research output, but if you want to understand what a school is in a sense and what does it care about, right? FC doesn't care that much about bibliometrics. There's a few people that do. So we have a biased view, right? So we try to address that in this paper by taking every individual person in the department and giving them the same weight in the picture. So we take Vincent's paper and we make it one. So we have a distribution of paper across research area for each individual person, and that person counts for one. no matter how many papers they have published. And that solves that issue in a way. But we also have to acknowledge that if you're trying to understand what the school's focus are and you want to compare between schools, well, schools also have different sizes. So it might not be fair to compare a school that has 4 faculty members with one that has 100, because then you will see that everything is done by that school and then that other school will be invisible. So we try to do the same thing at the school level. So we take the weighted researchers, so all with the weight of 1, and then we do the distribution of researcher topic across the school so that all schools are worth 1 in the system. And then we can calculate their specialization in the topic in a way that is comparable across schools. I hope that was clear enough. And this is our attempt to sort of visualize those focus, research area focus of the different schools. Again, this is based on the Web of Science data. So if you see something that doesn't reflect your understanding, that's possible. This is bound to change when we incorporate all of the publications that we will eventually be able to gather. But it's just an attempt to produce some indication of the disciplinary focus of schools and see that if you are, we see it already that some topics are seemingly not covered at all by some schools, while some other are distributed more evenly across the school. We see schools that have a distribution that is even across disciplines. And and we can see, we see again the bibliometrics focus of them and the outmetrics focus when Steffi was with us, as Stephanie Ausstein was now at Ottawa. It's just an attempt to visualize these disciplinary focus in a way that is not biased by size and by output of individual researcher. I'm not super satisfied with this output at this point. I think it looks a bit we definitely have to work a little better at illustrating these focus and digging a little deeper, but I think we're in the right direction. At least we're trying to take into account these bias and provide a better picture of what we do. So in summary, as I mentioned before, I think what we have in Canada, from what I can observe from the data so far, is that we're not really a melting pot of schools that all come together and do the same thing in different ways. We have our specialties, our focus, our own interests, our own identities that we bring to the table, and together we form this beautiful, I don't know how pretty it is, but it's beautiful mosaic of knowledge and scholarship. And I think that's something that we need to celebrate, and that's me as president of CAIS again. So the next step of that is, of course, completing the data set, making sure that we cover everything, and we do we are a large team, large-ish, so we are going to manually collect all the data from all the sources we can find. We're going to look at the CVs. So our goal is to make this comprehensive, to give the best possible picture. We have some work to do on the labels. Those were temporary labels. Probably some topic modeling might be interesting on top of that in order to better understand the actual topics that are being researched on. That was not a good sentence. And then what I think is also now putting my CAIS present hat, I guess, but not only, it's also my love for open science. We want to make this data set available to the community because we, of course, are now exploring and we're producing one map, but if you had a tool that you could navigate this data, it was available to us as a community, we could use it to better understand ourselves and our contribution or where we are, and possibly identify collaborations and use it. I put education in the bullet point here because for me, it's also a tool that I want to bring to the classroom to introduce my students to the field and to what we are as a community, and so that we can discover their interests. And so I think that that's what we're ultimately trying to do, is to produce something that we can all use and benefit from to understand ourselves and to grow as a stronger community. So with that, I thank you for your attention and I look forward to your question. And yeah.